Hello, and welcome to day 2 of the Foundation for Economic Education's Entrepreneur Week webinar series. I'm Sean Malone, as Michelle said, the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education, and also the host and creator of Out of Frame on YouTube, and the host of the Out of Frame Behind the Scenes podcast, which we do every Friday. I'm super excited to have the panel that we've got tonight for you guys. These are some of my favorite people, really, some of my best friends, going way back in some cases. And really, without further ado, this session is all about getting creative. We've got a great panel, like I said, and then we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So please get your comments into the Zoom chat. We're going to be monitoring that, and then those questions are going to be fed to me, and we'll do Q&A about halfway in, and that should leave us about 45 minutes for Q&A. So we'll get to a lot of your guys' questions. But without further ado, let's get to our panelists, starting with Afua Richardson, who is a comic book illustrator, just illustrator in general, great graphic designer, graphic artist, singer, musician, really one of my favorite people in the world. She's worked on titles like X-Men, Captain Marvel, got an Eisner Award for Marvel's World of Wakanda. Very recently completed doing all of the on-screen artwork for HBO's Lovecraft Country, and is working on her own book called Aquarius, the Book of Myrrh, which I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about Image, but I think just got signed to Image Comics, which is really, really exciting. And also, like I said, an incredible singer, multi-instrumentalist, flute player, jazz singer, R&B singer, and somebody who I originally got to know 14 years ago, which I realized over Halloween, which is insane. But got to know her first in my earlier career in music. So that known Afua for a long time. Really, really excited to have you on the panel. Thank you for being here, Afua.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Next up, we've got Kevin Lieber, who is, hopefully everybody knows, the host of Vsauce 2 on YouTube, a channel with, I believe you're at 4.3 million subscribers, sir. That is bonkers numbers. Vsauce, for those who haven't seen it, is an awesome math and science channel. Kevin talks about logic problems, and I think you've gotten into like every paradox known to man at this point, known to philosophy and science. Done some really, really, really cool stuff over the years. And really one of my favorite science YouTubers. Also started very recently, well, about a year ago, I'd imagine, the Create Unknown, which is an incredible podcast where Kevin and our buddy Matt Tabor interview other creators on YouTube and other platforms, people like, Carson, Quackity, Jenna Marbles, iDubbbz, Dolan Dark, Glozell Green, and me, in fact, on one of the very earliest episodes of the show. Really great to have you here, man. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be with you all.
Kevin also, by the way, hosted a series for us, for the Foundation for Economic Education. The series is called Invisible Hands, and you can check that out on our YouTube channel. But
with puppets.
With puppets, yeah. It's Kevin Lieber and puppets. Last but very certainly not least is really one of my best friends, Austin Wintory, composer for a brand new game that just came out called Pathless on PS5. I assume other platforms. PS5 is where I'm probably most familiar with it. Also a Grammy-nominated and BAFTA award-winning composer, also Interactive Arts and Sciences win for Best Original Music for his score to one of the most beautiful video games I've ever played called Journey, which I'm sure a lot of you in the audience will have played or have heard of before. Game Audio Network Award, Best Interactive Score for Erica. Hollywood Music and Media Arts Award win for his work on the Banner Saga. Honestly, Austin's done some of the best and most original, most interesting video game music that I've heard in a long time. A lot of them on really cool indie games. Banner Saga, I played through the first 2 episodes of Banner Saga last year when Austin came and joined us for FeeCon in last June. And just a beautiful, beautiful game, incredible artwork. Honestly, very cool stuff. If you guys haven't had a chance to check out some of the games that he's worked on, or some of the TV shows and movies that he scored and everything else. Very cool stuff. Austin, thank you so much for joining us, man.
It's a pleasure. I owe it all to the book of standards that you gave me very graciously, maybe 15 years ago or so. It's sitting literally about 10 feet that way.
I think that is hilarious, and I do not deserve any credit for your career, but thanks. Yeah, I gave Austin a fake book before I left LA, and it was my like big book of jazz standards that I no longer needed as I was moving my way across the country again. But anyway, I'm so excited to have you guys all here. You're all some of my favorite creators, and we've done panels together before, live normally. So this is kind of an interesting experience doing this way. But one of the things that these guys know, and I'd like our audience to understand, is what I like with these kinds of panels is, first of all, a really conversational approach. So I'll ask some questions, I'll moderate, I'll sort of direct traffic a little bit, but for the most part, it's going to be a pretty free-flowing conversation between the four of us. And I've got some good prompts, and then we'll try to get to Q&A as much as we can towards the middle part of the session, I think. I'll start here, really. And I want to hear from everybody on this, but what was the first thing that really attracted you to having a creative career, really when you were younger? I assume, all of you probably dreamed of some of, being a part of the kind of creative arts when you were little. But what was it that first attracted you? And I'll just start with Fu, and we'll just kind of go down the line a little bit.
To be perfectly honest, I didn't think that a career in arts was even possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us feel that way.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense of like where, because I know, but our audience doesn't know, where'd you grow up, and like what kind of environment did you grow up in, and paint a picture for that.
Well, I up in New York City, and I was born in Harlem, and then haunted the East Village in Brooklyn. But my father is a physicist and a soldier officer, excuse me, the distinction.
Yeah.
The U.S. Coast Guard, and he taught physics at West Point. Really, really brilliant man. But before he did all of those brilliant things, he was an oil painter and a sculptor. So he always encouraged me to create art, but he didn't think that art could be a viable career because of the things that he experienced growing up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which was, of course, he was born in 1949, a completely different world than what it is now. So It wasn't that he didn't believe in the arts or he didn't believe in me. He just didn't want me to suffer. And I think, at some point, every one of us can speak to this, perhaps, or maybe not. But a lot of us have parents who were just like, yeah, so when are you going to get a real job?
Yep.
Yeah. But for me, art was something that was more necessity. I was, I'm a musician, and I was a musician first. So I saw graphic design touching everything that informed my decisions, from flyers to posters to just going to the store and picking cereal when I ate that kind of stuff. Like, well, which bothers me, tasty. So art is something that, renders information. And I'm like, well, if I want other people to know what it is that I do, then I need to create a flyer that it doesn't even matter what is happening in the flyer, like what event is going on. I want people to keep it. I want people to have an emotional attachment to it.
I think that's a really great way of looking at that. And it's similar to me in a sense where, you guys know this. I mean, I started in music as well. And to a similar extent, like I started seeing other avenues for creativity, and especially things like marketing your own bands and stuff like that gives you a different perspective on those kinds of things. Kevin, what was it for you that I think first sparked your interest in kind of developing a creative career? Or was that like Afua? Was that not even on the table when you were little?
No, not really. It wasn't something that I thought about all that much. And even throughout high school, it wasn't a thing that I thought about. I mean, the high school that I went to didn't offer any sort of creative classes. Uh, as I've met people over the years and I've heard of schools that they went to, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I had film school and I had like my own radio station." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous." I had like Latin class, and that was it. It was very dry. So it really wasn't until um, college where a roommate of mine was taking a film class, and I had to help him. He needed somebody to hold the camera. And that was the first time I was like, wait, you can like make movies and that's a class and you can get like graded on
Yeah.
how good the thing you made is. That sounds amazing.
Kevin,
So
so I grew up in a town. Well, I went to high school in a town of 5,000 people, roughly. I know you didn't grow up in New York City, so why don't you talk a little bit about where you grew up and maybe where you're still at, I think, actually.
yeah, the town I grew up in was less than 2,000 people. My graduating
Yeah.
class was about 90 kids.
Yeah.
So there was just not any opportunity for creative stuff. And the one of the stranger things I would say about my journey towards a creative career is that it honestly was always other people telling me that I should be doing creative stuff. Like I didn't know that about myself for some reason, but other people helped guide me. Like, can you please try out for this, improv comedy group because we would love to have you? And I'm like, okay, I guess so. And then that went really well. And it's like a series of that throughout my life until eventually YouTube came along and I treated that just as a hobby. That wasn't a career for the first several years of YouTube. And it just kind of eventually became one.
Yeah. Yeah, YouTube is, I mean, it's definitely for people who are in the audience, especially younger people who think of YouTube as being this sort of professional platform in a lot of ways, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are creators exclusively for the platform who've, actually making a living doing it. Well, people like you, for example. But I mean, back in 2006, 2007, like that just wasn't, it was just a fun thing that maybe we could try to do, or it'd be maybe a cool thing to just post some cool, funny videos or something like that. We'll get to this a little bit later, but I definitely want to explore a little bit of your early content versus what you do now, because it was so different. And I think that's
Okay.
pretty interesting.
Sure.
Austin, same question here, man. Like when you were a kid. Now I know that you and I grew up in a fairly similar part of the country, Colorado and Nebraska. Colorado for Austin in this case, but
Yep.
but I think there are more music classes typically. I mean, even growing up, we had more probably music classes than film classes, or probably graphic design classes and things like that. But how'd you get your start in this?
Well, as a point of comparison, your town of 5,000, my high school had 4,000. So I didn't exactly grow up in a desolate area. It's on the south side of Denver, but
Yeah.
huge public high school. And something that I've really become fixated with as the years have gone on since high school is the size of it was not the selling point, although that had this secondary effect where there were so many kids, that there were so many diverse interests, that they could sustain like 4 different student orchestras.
Wow.
And so, of varying levels of skill. And so the top orchestra, the sort of, most stringently auditioned orchestra, they were pretty good. I mean, they were basically a college level orchestra, since the most of the kids in that orchestra would then be the types to go off in music, major in music in college. So when I went to high school at 14, I was already quite obsessed with music and composing, and so I went kind of defiantly marching into the student orchestra and said, I would love to write music for the group. And I had no idea what I was doing. And but they agreed. And so, 4 years later, they let me conduct and write music. And, I was initially writing everything by hand, and they let me use the teacher's lounge to photocopy the sheet music to give out to the rest of the orchestra and stuff. But by the time I went to college, I had spent vastly more time in front of a real orchestra than any of my classmates by far. And so I was in this crazy lucky position where what might have been an idle curiosity was given this pathway that just let it sort of ratchet up out of control until I was, just on an unstoppable path to make this my livelihood. I was passionate about it. I was obsessed with music, and particularly I had fallen in love with specifically the film scores of Jerry Goldsmith when I was about 10. And I just thought, well, what an amazing way to make a living. I didn't know anything about music, but I just thought, I love the creativity. And I was always fascinated by movies in particular because of the fact that so many people had to coordinate to create something that we consume in 2 hours or less. And yet it's, the culmination of hundreds or sometimes thousands of people, and like millions of labor hours, as it were. And that fascinated me, and that blew me away. The more I learned about that, the more I kind of became obsessed with it. So yeah, my whole life I should say, the reason I bring up the high school thing is just because it dawned on me how lucky that was, and how much my current career is enabled by something that I didn't work towards. I didn't go build a school that then had all these orchestras and talented music students to help kind of be a positive feedback loop to my curiosity about composing. And it's become a driving force of my life since then to say, how do I try to make that so that I'm less anomalous?
That's been,
it's sort of outrageous how lucky I was.
I think one thing I didn't mention about Austin at the beginning, and I think is actually really one of the things that, is probably most important to you in general, is actually going out and doing, working with smaller orchestras or high school, college orchestras, things like that, and really building that network and that community of people, especially around video game music and doing video game concerts and things like that. I find this whole, Austin and my trajectory are probably more similar than mine with Afua and Kevin to some extent, because we both went to music school. But my trajectory to
music school, in fact.
Well, I attended New York.
Point out that's how we met.
we met through a connection at NYU, where I did my master's, and Austin, you did your bachelor's, correct?
I was doing undergrad. Yeah, I didn't even finish though. I transferred out of there.
You went to USC
in LA,
right?
So I'm an NYU apostate.
But my experience was actually really different because I did go to a very small high school. We had a jazz band and we had a wind ensemble basically, but that was pretty much it. We didn't have a symphony orchestra. We didn't have strings. We didn't have any marching band. Obviously, was kind of a big deal, but because Nebraska. But everything else, though, for me, it was a sort of an interesting progression of exploring things that I was curious about. So, as a performer, I got really interested. So I started as a drummer and as a battery percussionist. Playing snare drum and bass drum and timpani and things like that, and I was a section leader, and eventually I kind of realized I had, maybe by 14 or 15, I realized I was really weak on the melodic side of things, on idiophones like marimbas and vibraphones and stuff like that. So I started getting better at those kinds of things, and as I did that, I kind of realized I needed to learn some music theory. I found a guy who was actually the choir director at school who would teach me some of that in like an independent study class. And the more I learned that, the more I kind of wanted to get into composition, and the more I wanted to do, my own writing and things like that. But every step along the way, and now I'm a filmmaker. Now I'm just really more of a creative director than anything, because I've escalated through a whole bunch of other things. So I learned how to do video editing. I learned how to do graphic design. I learned how to do animation and motion graphics. And then I started really getting interested in how to build a team of people, going back to Austin's point about how these projects get bigger and bigger and bigger. And how do you maintain an organizational structure that allows everybody to be super creative? And that's now what I'm probably most passionate about. I'm most interested in the creative structure and how you bring people together to create big projects. And I also wanted to mention this is really in line with one of the things that goes back to the very beginning of our organization, of the Foundation for Economic Education, because really early in our history, our founder, Leonard Reed, wrote an essay called I Pencil, which I know Austin and I have talked about a bunch, and Kevin's aware of. Actually, I don't know if Afua and I have talked about it at all, but the point of that is that even something as simple as a pencil is the product of really millions of people who you've never met and you don't know around the world, because it takes completely different skills, often coming from different parts of the world, to come up with graphite and the wood and the paints and the ferrule and the eraser and all of the things that go into that. And then that even keeps expanding out, because just to get the rubber for the eraser, takes skills in planting trees, and it takes skills in processing all of the aspects of this take unique knowledge and skills. And it's a really fascinating thing when you start exploring out, and when you look at something like a film production, I mean, right off the bat, you're talking about hundreds or thousands of people all working together on the main product, not even on, producing the food for craft services or, producing the microchips for the cameras and all those kinds of things. So it's really interesting when you start looking at the world from that standpoint. And I don't know. I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's something I think really matters to this conversation. One of the things that I'm always fascinated by with creators, especially because my own trajectory was not that obvious. I got interested in film scoring by way of writing some music and writing what's called programmatic music, which is like storytelling music, basically. I got interested in that, and then I thought, well, maybe you can add music, like doing that was so interesting to me that the idea of film scoring got interesting. But then once I was doing some of that kind of work, I realized that I wanted to tell my own stories. And so that then kind of elevated what I was doing in a different way. So my question to you guys is, how close is your career now to what you thought it would be when you first started it? Yeah, Afua, you want to start?
It's funny when I really started considering just the thought of being a professional artist. I was a band nerd, dragging myself to comic conventions and forcing myself to speak to people. And one thing that I noticed about the illustration world as opposed to the music scene was, with comic conventions, you can walk right up to the CEO of a company. They're right there. They're right at these comic conventions. The artist who makes some of your favorite things, the creator of Thanos, the head of Marvel and DC Comics, they're right there. And a lot of times they're artists. And if you don't know their faces, you would kind of just pass them by. But they were right there to ask questions, and I didn't want to harass them, like, tell me all the things so I won't be a terrible artist. But I'm completely self-taught, and I didn't go to school for art, but I understood the discipline that it takes from the classical music world, where it's like, okay, if you want to be comfortable with this instrument, or in art cases, tools or brushes or programs, you have to put in those hours. And it's not just practicing making perfect, it's perfect practice making perfect. It's understanding what you don't know and then working towards that. So just the idea of getting paid to do art instead of telemarketing was great. This is something that I wanted to do anyway, and then get paid for it. Of course, it's always going to be work. That phrase, if you love what you do, you'll never a day in your life, was never an artist. Like, because it is a lot of work and it can change how you feel about it.
I doubt that any one of us on this panel works less than 60 hours in a given week. Very
I
much
love
doubt that.
my favorite quote was on an episode of Shark Tank when Lori Greiner said that entrepreneurs are the only people that work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40 hours a week.
I'm
And
saying
Yeah. I mean,
we
it's
can
like,
do it in our pajamas.
I mean, that's been the sort of saving grace of this last year is really getting more casual than I already was. Some of these.
Right? I
But,
fit in no pants that have that don't have elastic.
Afua, you just said something really profound that I really feel is worth highlighting. It needs to be said, because when you said practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. The idea that just mindlessly logging hours at a thing is really not fundamentally the same thing as conscientiously getting better at it and examining where your flaws are and where your strengths are and like what other people can teach you and all of that. And I've never heard that articulated in like a perfect bumper sticker kind of way. I'm so
Yeah.
I am so gonna quote that relentlessly for the next 10 years.
So let me actually,
really.
let me,
Because I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for
because,
it, Afua.
You know, as a musician, that if you practice something incorrectly,
oh yeah.
that when you get back to that phrase, you're going to play it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah,
So
you know, and this is a thing that I think translates really well to different mediums too, because with music there's a lot of muscle memory, right? There's a lot of like I've placed my fingers this way, I've put my arms here, I've learned how to do it this way, and then every time you go back and do it, at some point that's your default starting place. But I think the same is true of a lot of other things. Like when I sit down to write now, there are phrases and structures and things that I sort of inherently gravitate towards that if I want to break out of that, I actually have to, it takes time and takes some work. But I did want to go to Kevin because I think, you know, I kind of teased this a minute ago, but this actually I think segues nicely into this is like what you started doing on YouTube and what you're doing today are super, super different. And I think, you know, maybe you can speak a little bit to that idea of, you know, listening to feedback and really examining what you were doing and then altering it as the audience has changed and as the feedback gave you different information about what was working and what was not working. I think social media and YouTube is one of the few areas where you get really intense feedback in a way that you don't actually even going to school. Like it's not the same kind of feedback. You get really direct consumer feedback on YouTube. So talk about that a little bit.
You do. I have noticed that. You're right, Sean. I have noticed that you do get comments when you put stuff up. Yeah. So the trick is to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and not ignore the criticism that is valid, because a lot of it will be. We had a guest on our Create Unknown podcast recently who said exactly this, that like some of the most brutal early comments that they got, which were really mean, in the end ended up helping them in a weird way, like as weird as that is to say out loud, become a better creator, become a better host, become a better just make better videos, essentially. So yeah, so YouTube and other online creative outlets do allow for a unique level of, I mean, I can't even imagine being like a documentary maker or something and spending 5 years or more on one thing.
Yeah.
To finally release it and then get feedback. And then it's like, well, now what? It's done. I can't change it now. Whereas, you know, with YouTube, you can put something out and by the next week you've implemented some level of changes. So yeah, when I started, I was doing comedy and then eventually evolved into education because the internet is already really funny. This is like a different topic for like a different seminar. But I think we've gotten to the point where the internet is so funny for free that to make a career in comedy is insane at this point, because, you know, random Twitter guy is going to make a way better joke than you spending all day trying to think of. So,
you know, so So I'm going to bring this up, but a little known fact about Kevin is that he once a long time ago interned for the Conan O'Brien show, and what's fascinating to me about this a little bit is that now, so Conan was, I think, in a lot of ways pre-YouTube, because a lot of the tone that he has and a lot of his sketches and things like that are very much at home on what is now like a lot of channels on YouTube and stuff like that. But now he's competing with, to exactly your point, Conan is competing with people with no budget at all, and they are crushing him on
Did you see the
YouTube
Conan
and on these
news
platforms.
today?
No, what was there?
His show announced that it's ending, and he's moving to a new show on HBO, like John.
Wow, I
Literally
had
the
not heard
news
that.
today. I saw.
But I think stuff like
Yeah.
that it's so fascinating because the world that we inhabit now, even from 10 years ago, is not even close to the same, right? Like everything that I have seen since I started making videos in, let's say, 2002 or so, 2002, 2003 is when I first started learning how to be an editor. And then even before that, when I was learning how to be a musician, you know, the career paths, everything about the industries that we inhabit are so radically different. Like music is so weird because like when I started graduate school, I had no idea how to use a digital audio workstation. I didn't know how to do sequencing or synthesize music or any of that kind of stuff. It's, you know, I was coming into it 2005, 2006, and that was just not, I mean, I grew up, at best, I had a little bit of skills in live audio and in mixing and that kind of thing. I had no idea how to take, you know, VSTs and turn them into, you know, into music, right? Into demos and into things like that. It took me a good 3 or 4 years to figure that out. And now, if you don't know that by high school or something for some of the kids who are out there today, I mean, I couldn't imagine not knowing how to do that really, really young. And I think that the same is true of like people who've grown up learning how to be YouTubers, you know, learning how to be in front of a camera and stuff like that. It's such a different world that we live in.
Yeah, right. When I was first creating art, I did everything with watercolor and permanent marker.
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah, learning how to
it's
use
funny
a
because
pen and like a Cintiq and stuff is just it's an insane skill, you
Oh
know.
my God, it took me a year. I hated it. And a lot of people will ask me, like, well, is it important to, you know, work traditionally and, or is it more important to work digitally? And I'm like, honestly, both are absolutely vital because one, you know, have the tactile surface, you are able to gauge your perspective. It's kind of like hearing something acoustically. You have a better understanding versus hearing something in headphones. You can always turn up and down the volume, where digitally you can zoom in forever and you can flip things around and you have a million layers that you can work with. But learning that, you know, okay, you have certain rules and limitations with your mediums here, and these are the rules and limitations of your digital medium. Just figuring those things out. You know, I had a job that had Photoshop on my computer, including the one that I met you at, Sean. And
Right?
I was doing some of my first Marvel covers, sitting behind a receptionist desk,
Yeah.
ordering paper clips, and then, you know, trying to brush the crumbs
Wow.
off of the keyboard while
Yeah.
like learning Photoshop. And the boss would come in when we had, you know, clients. We worked at a jingle house. And, you know, clients like Saatchi and all these big advertising agencies would come in and be like, this is our receptionist. She works for Marvel Comics. And I'm like,
That was so
I was trying to steal every hour I could, trying to learn how to do this because somebody told me, oh, well, you can't make comics out of watercolor. And I was like, I can't? Oh.
So
okay,
that's an
well, I better learn
interesting
how to do this then.
It's an interesting point, though. So yeah, Afua and I met when I was working as an assistant music supervisor for a company in New York that did commercial music, you know, jingles, like she said, not just jingles, really cool orchestral stuff, and we did a lot of big clients, but that was a whole whole other conversation to have. But I do think it's interesting because when I was like learning music theory, and then when I was first learning how to write music, I would take, staff notepads all over the place. I'd try to take, it'd be like journaling or writing in any other context. And so I used to do that. I used to be a lifeguard, and I worked over the winters at an indoor pool. And there's nobody goes to indoor pools at 8 p.m. in December in Nebraska. So really the job is just sitting there waiting for the water aerobics class to end. And then the last 2 hours of the night is just empty time. So I would just sit there on the lifeguard chair and try to write stuff or try to practice whatever I could on like a practice pad or something like that. And just constantly, kind of building up those skills wherever I could find a moment to do it,
And that's kind of the thing too. Like when you're an artist and you're creative and you, some people go to school and some don't. As soon as you get out of school,
that's actually so that's actually a question. The first question on here, and I think now's as good a time as any to actually get into some of these. The very first question on here is art school worth it? Like Parsons or RSI or RISD, or honestly, I think the same would apply to music school or Kevin, I know that you didn't go to school for YouTubing, I don't know. It's not really a thing, but yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Because I think, Austin and I both went to school for music. Afua, you didn't go to school for design or for illustration,
no.
Or Kevin.
But I did go to school for music.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that? Do you think attending art school is important now?
It's interesting because one, there's so many tutorials online, but it's difficult to find good teachers. You have to weed through quite a bit. And you also don't know what you don't know when it comes to art. So you have to know what phrases and key phrases and, which SEO optimized phrases to give you the right lessons for what it is you want to know. And there's some things that you just don't know are possible unless someone has outlined them and you accidentally come up with something. So for me, like learning art on my own, the thing that I craved most was guidance and critique. And I think that school can really offer that. But it doesn't automatically guarantee that you're going to be a great artist. And it's really tough because I'll get a lot of students who come out of school who are just like, okay, well, I have a portfolio, but I have no experience. So I think, if you're going to go to school, I almost feel like the experience is just as vital.
Yeah.
Because I've thrown into all of these different situations where I treated my art like a business, and I knew, okay, well, this is how long it takes for me to do this. This is, the materials that I'll need. And I was able to adequately say, okay, if I'm going to do this and my other job, because I didn't have the experience yet to be able to say, okay, well, if you want me to work on this project, it's going to be this amount of money. In the beginning, it was just, logos and tattoos and voiceover thingies where you might not even get paid at all. And people are still looking at you like you're a charity case. Like, you should be happy someone wants to hire you to do your
for exposure.
You just do that, right? People die of exposure, honey. Like I can't live on it. Phone bills don't take exposure credits. Like,
Kevin, Kevin, what do you think about this idea of whether or not you have to go to school or whether or not school is worth it?
Sure. Yeah, I think that it's a great question, especially nowadays, that it's on a lot of people's minds. I would say that perhaps for like the skill element of it, like learning how to use programs or tutorials, probably not necessary. For me, though, the social element was really critical, and I could see that being really important for a lot of people as well. I had no frame of reference really before college what I was good at or what I was bad at, and being able to be in a lot of different classes and a lot of different group scenarios and with a whole diverse range of people at different levels really taught me a lot about what I could potentially excel in, what I probably wouldn't excel in as much, what I liked and what I didn't like. So that part of it, I do believe is really critical. I don't see how you could really get that sitting at your computer all day. So
Yeah,
that's kind
I
of how I
think
think about it.
no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and for me, I think because I think a lot about especially graduate school because I went to a very expensive graduate school and I'm still paying for it to this day. But the reality is, I think one of the things that I got the most out of that experience was not only being around a lot of people who were really good and who pushed me to be better, which I did think was actually really important. Maybe more than that was going back to the piece about feedback, because part of that experience is constantly subjecting yourself to critique and constantly subjecting yourself not only from your professors and your teachers, but also from your peers. You know, I mean, going in front of a class and saying like, this is the piece of music I wrote. This piano player is going to play it in front of you right now. And then after he plays it, you're going to tell me everything you hated about it, everything you liked about it. Like we're going to have a real conversation about this. And it's tough and it's really hard to deal with at first, but it's also so incredibly essential to be able to do this stuff better and better over time. And I think learning how to accept that kind of feedback is probably what I gained the most out of spending so much time in school.
If a student-to-student feedback session eats you alive, then you really would do well to stay out of a professional environment where they don't play with kid gloves and where there's actual stakes. Like people give you feedback because the pendulum swings with tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, at a time.
Yeah, Afua, Drew, our boss at the lodge in New York, when I got hired, the first thing that he said to me when he offered me the job and when I accepted, he said, his only advice to me was, the cheapest mistake you can make, it will cost us $100,000. Have fun. That was literally the advice I got when I started that job, and that's some pressure, for a junior level guy, right? Like coming into this thing. But Austin's right. I mean, like the stakes are real for people once you get outside of the school environment. And I think learning how to take feedback and criticism and turn it into something constructive and make yourself better. I mean, if you can't do that, like in a school setting, like it's going to be really, really hard to do it.
I also want to say that also getting encouragement is incredibly important. It's not just about getting criticism and learning how to handle with stress. It's also like, hey, I'm better than a lot of these people at this. And I didn't know that before because of course my mom is going to say I'm great, but that's not like a valid encouragement. But if you're in a classroom and you get like an A and everybody else got a B, all of a sudden you're like, hey, maybe I should continue to pursue this thing.
Yeah.
Kevin, that was a great comment.
I agree. I've got so many questions here. I want to try to get.
Sean, if I may, I want to weigh in on the school thing.
All right. Oh, please,
just for the record, because I have very split personality on the subject. Because when it comes to learning the skills, I think I have a suspicion that a decade from now, there's going to be a lot of research that shows that going on YouTube and subscribing to services like Masterclass, but the more nitty gritty, down in the mud, skill specific ones that are less about this kind of top level inspiration, but are like, okay, click here, do this. You can self teach through the internet effectively for free or very cheaply. And the notion, I think it's going to become, especially as COVID has probably accelerated this process, I suspect the idea of taking on $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in debt to learn a thing that like Khan Academy teaches, and maybe teaches better, and also maybe teaches in a way that you are receptive to more, like it just clicks with you more naturally than sitting in a lecture hall or whatever. I have a feeling that our whole relationship to specifically academia, like post high school kind of education, I think that I suspect there's going to be a big shift, and probably a very good one. At the same time, I'm all for that. Like to me, there's no excuse. You can live anywhere in the world. You could make, using your phone, you can make amazing, groundbreaking music. Speaking to my craft, so like, I think that the barriers to entry have all but evaporated on every front, which is amazing to me. That's the makings of a renaissance, if we're not already neck deep in it as it is. It also means that there's a lot more content being made, so it sometimes gets a little hard to find. Like Kevin's point earlier about like, or I can't remember which one of you, I think it was Kevin, said like that, to get in on YouTube today as a comedian is, you're wading into the public pool when there's like 40,000 people and it's neck and neck. And but on the flip side, the social aspect that you just mentioned is I think not to be underestimated in a good university experience as well. And that's the part that you can't replace. And that's where I'm like, I have a feeling, speaking of entrepreneurship and whatnot, I have a feeling that whether it's through social media type things or something else, or just grassroots kind of like, hey, we're getting together once a week. We have a nerd music group that gets together at this, at IHOP or whatever, like whatever it takes the shape of. I think the fact that you are thrown with you are intermingled with a bunch of people that you don't know. It's a little more chaotic. It's not self-selection of like, I'm gonna look like I always have a knee-jerk sort of ruffled feathers when people say, oh, it's so wonderful to go find like-minded people. I'm like, no, I want not like-minded people. I don't want clones or siblings, as it were. I want to be surrounded by people that are going to challenge my convictions and are going to expose me to things that I never would have thought of. And that is something that is intrinsic to the university notion that I think is worth figuring out how to replace, if the broad idea of like super expensive, highly ideological, highly, 1,000 other things that are less appetizing to me about universities. Like if we're trying to replace that.
I think that point is so critical too, and I do also I want to sort of second or third or fourth what Kevin said about positive encouragement too, and some of that is like, part of what was so great for me about the university experience is a combination of the two things that we just talked about, which is it's meeting people who had interests and who had passions for things that I'd never heard of before, and then being exposed to those things, and then through that exposure going like, holy cow, like Victor Wooten is amazing. How did I never hear Victor Wooten play anything before, right? I'm using a real example. Like that was a very specific moment where I heard like classical thump for the very first time. And then I was like, oh my God, people can play bass in a way that I'd never heard anybody play bass before. Those moments have to happen spontaneously. They won't happen if you only hang out with like metalheads or only hang out with like all the people who you're already friends with or whatever, because you've already heard all your friends' favorite stuff, right? Like you need to find a way into some randomness, and I do think that is super important. But and again, we've got so many. Sorry, we got so many questions here. I get a lot of great questions here. Like seriously, I'm looking at a list of maybe 40 at the moment. Like there's a pile of questions here, and I want to try to get to a few of them at least. But I think one that comes up I think is maybe a really good one. How do you overcome things like a fear of failure and low self-esteem when taking the leap of faith and just go for it? I think that's a really interesting one, especially in context of everything we've talked about the flood of feedback that you get. But so I'd love to hear about that. I don't know. Maybe just Kevin, if you want to start there.
Sure. Yeah. I think that can be a big struggle. One of the things that I guess we touched on earlier that is kind of a trial by fire of YouTube is that you're going to find out pretty quickly, like how you're able to deal with strangers around the world telling you that like your mustache is creepy. So like that's going to happen. And you're going to say, okay, well, thank you. Anime star 27. I will think about that the rest of the day. And then hopefully forget about it tomorrow. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, do you want other people to see your stuff? I have a close friend who's a great artist, and he would always get stuck in his own head about not releasing his stuff. And I would have conversations with him that was, ostensibly like, I don't know what the point is of you creating your art unless you're going to share it with others. Is it to just get the ideas out of your head or to just prove to yourself you can do it? That's okay, but you're really kind of robbing the rest of us of your art. And that to me is ultimately the reason to make anything.
I think that segues a little bit into a discussion more just directly about entrepreneurship as well, because I think we've all probably met a lot of people who are sort of in the same place, and some of it I think is insecurity and just unwillingness to put yourself out there because you're afraid that if you do, people might take it badly, or the feedback won't be as positive as you hope. I've also seen it where people do that because, well, I think this all also comes from insecurity, but it turns into a point of bitterness and anger for some people over time because they've never actually put their stuff out there, and then it becomes I could have been a contender kind of situation. Like people who will, and I've had that. Just because I'm a little bit older now, and I've seen the trajectory of some of these things where you see somebody that I went to school with who was like, oh yeah, if I only had a shot at doing this or that or whatever, I would have made such better work than this person or that person. And in reality, it's sort of a mask of, I'm not actually secure enough to put myself out there. I never did, and now I'm angry about it. And I think that getting over that insecurity, it's not easy for everybody, for sure. But I think taking it in baby steps is probably the best advice I could give. Is like put out something that's little, that you're not totally emotionally invested in. Something that if somebody hates it, it's not going to kill you, right? You're not going to feel super bad about it. And just start testing the waters. Just do a little thing here and a little thing there. And then eventually, and A, learn from it, but B, then eventually you're going to probably realize that people are a lot more supportive and a lot more encouraging than you probably imagine. There's, my experience anyway, there's way more people out there. I think we focus on the negative, but there's way more people out there who are going to gravitate towards something and go, wow, that was really cool. I'd love to see more. And if you can really focus on those voices, I think that's better.
I think also it's worth highlighting that the odds of putting something out and getting a negative reaction are infinitesimally tiny compared to just getting no reaction. And to me it was an empowering revelation when it dawned on me that the worst thing that happens in 99% of cases is you swing and you miss, and it's like it never happened. There's no negative consequence, because even the time you spent doing it is time you've advanced in your craft. It's time that you've learned from. Like, it's not even yes, there is some amount of opportunity cost in your own time, but broadly speaking, especially if you're doing the Afua trademarked perfect practice, like you are benefiting from that time, even if no one kind of is directly rewarding you for it. When I get asked by composers looking to get into video games or whatever all the time questions along those lines, like kind of, what do I do if I fail? And I said, how would you even, like, literally, let's just take a look at this epistemologically. How do you even fail? Like, you're never going to get never gonna get a pink slip on behalf of all future video game developers in the universe that are like, we've collectively decided you're not for us. Like, there will always be more opportunities. They're just simply, it will never stop, especially if you look for them and you seek them out and you create them. So it's like, I've never understood. I understand the irrational fear of failure, but if you try to dissect it, you really quickly realize just how irrational it is, and that made it at least easier for me to let go of.
So here's a related question to this, which is how do you figure out what you like and are curious about? The reason I feel like it's related is because I think a lot of the things that people get really insecure about are those things that they have developed passions for, but maybe actually aren't sure yet that they want to do, right? And so there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty in that arena. And I do think some people struggle a little bit finding their voice because they haven't really settled in on something that's theirs, right? Something that's really that they can own, and they feel like this is me. This is what my art style looks like. This is what my writing voice looks like, things like that. How did you guys sort of figure out what you liked and what you disliked and really develop an individual voice as creators?
Well, one thing that having experience as a graphic designer really early on and as a musician did for me was help me think about my work in a position of service instead of just how do I get followers and jobs and likes and things like that. It was, what can I do that's missing? Because it's really easy to complain about what isn't there. Like, well, there's not enough representation. There's not enough, of this, and this. But instead of complaining about it, I see it as an opportunity. I mean, this is something like
this is the most entrepreneurial way you can think, right? It's find a gap. What is missing? That's such a great question. What is missing? And how can
I wish there was more of this, because it's something that you're genuinely interested in and you want to nerd out about and dig more and more and more into and go down that well on the internet endlessly. You're searching for it already. Like, well, why aren't there enough? Like, one thing for me was, okay, superheroes. When I was younger, in addition to being a musician, I actually wanted to be an Olympian. I wanted to join the U.S. Olympic track team for high jump, long jump, and relay racing. Like, it was something that I genuinely wanted to do. And then seeing actual athletes in motion and saying, okay, well, these people have these kinds of body types, and people who do deadlifts have these kinds of body types. So I started drawing it, and I'm like, okay, there's kind of a discrepancy here between comic book muscles, which is stylized and it's forgivable and I love it and it's cool. It doesn't matter that it's not actually anatomically correct always, but why does Wonder Woman have such small quads? If she's going to lift this car, and I could get upset, but I was just like, well, this is someone else's art. This was their interpretation, and I'm just going to do mine. I'm just going to make my own, and that's sort of the frustration that I think that a lot of people face, is that they're like, oh, well, it's not there. I can't make it, and it's a conspiracy against the things that I like. It's like, oh no, you could get mad, or you could get to work. Start studying, and a lot of people get paralyzed by their, oh, I'm not good enough. Look at all these amazing things online. Why am I why would anyone make anything or take anything from me? And I think to myself, if I do nothing, if I don't draw another thing, would I be happy? If for the next 10 years, my life is exactly as it is right now, without making anything further, being in the exact same financial situation, not expanding, not growing, when you put in those hours and you start with those little goals, like you mentioned, once it's complete, it's like, okay, well, I can either do this better or find to do.
Yeah.
It's making a trajectory for yourself.
Kevin, how'd you figure out what you liked and what? I mean, again, you have a very specific voice on YouTube as well. I think, even in the context of Vsauce, I mean, Michael and Jake are very, very different from the way that you present. They do things totally different than you do. The channels align, I think, in, obviously there's overlap in science and in education and being some of the primary education channels on YouTube, but you guys all have really, really different styles. And, I got to imagine that there's, first of all, temptation to mimic somebody else's style because you feel like it's working better or whatever at one point or another, like, oh, Jake did this video, maybe I should do this kind of thing. How do you maintain your sense of self in that arena, especially when there's so much pressure to move and shift and kind of do that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think whenever I've created something, I think talking about like what is that gap in the market also, plays right into what is the gap in creativity that I'm seeing. Ultimately, not all creative people are going to be like this. Not all creative entrepreneurs are going to be like this, but a lot of the ones that I've spoken with, and it's definitely the case for me, is I have an idea that I get stuck in my head and it won't leave me alone until I make the thing. And then once I make it, then I can stop thinking about it. and then a new one comes along, and this is just kind of like a nonstop hamster wheel in a way, but I like that hamster wheel. And I like I like being able to kind of breathe after having made the thing that I've been holding my breath over for a while. But yeah, there is that like imagination element of like, I wish there was a video about this, or I wish this song was written. It's like, well, then I should write that song, because who else is going to? No one is going to unless I do it. And that's kind of like a sentiment that I've always had with creating, whether it was with music, which I also used to do, or comics, which I also used to do, or it's just like you have an idea and you want to get it out there. You show it to people who are willing to look at it. Hopefully they like it, but either way, you're kind of moving on to the next project after that.
There's another question in our overall list of this big list. By the way, just quickly to the audience, I'm so sorry. We're never going to get to everybody's questions here. Like, there's just no way. It's amazing. I'm so excited that so many of you have written in. This is awesome. But there is another question on here that I do think ties into what you were just saying, Kevin, which is like, the question was simple. It was just, how do you come up with ideas for videos? But I think that maybe we can expand out a little bit. Like, Kevin, I'll let you answer first, but Austin, I'd love to hear, like, how do you come up with ideas for themes for things? You just had a great 8-bit music video essay done about your themes, and I'd love to know, let's talk about that a little bit. But Kevin, like, how do you come up with ideas for videos?
Sure. Well, I work with my co-host on the podcast is also the researcher and writer on Vsauce 2, Matt Tabor, and he and I work very closely on coming up with topic ideas. But ultimately, there are a lot of amazing things, whether they're in science or whether they're in math, that if you were just to read about them, they're pretty boring. And part of what I really get interested in and excited about and like creatively fulfilled in doing is making something that is a kind of a dry research paper into an entertaining YouTube video, whether that involves like a Keanu Reeves cardboard stand-up or like, I don't know, whatever dumb
a ball
thing
pit perhaps in your backyard.
Sure, like a ball pit, and that'll represent this like crazy anthropological idea of like the cognitive limit of our social circles. But like I get really excited about kind of like blending absurdity and creativity with hard math and science. That's just like a fun puzzle for me to put together.
I think that's what I think part of why you and I are friends to some extent is I think we really share that. I mean, a lot of the work that I do, and for those who are on the webinar who have or haven't seen the Out of Frame show that I do, it's very similar in a lot of ways. It's the idea of trying to take ideas in philosophy and economics and political science and connect them to things that aren't boring, right? Connect them to things that are actually like interesting and relevant to people's lives. And it's an interesting task to do that because you are a lot of times, I am, and I know you are, and I know Tabor is, like a lot of times reading white papers or reading peer reviewed articles and things like that, and then trying to synthesize that information into something, something that other people would actually want to watch, which is not always the
make it
easiest thing to do.
conversational,
But
make it relatable, come up with analogies.
Yeah.
It is like a weird puzzle that is fun to make.
And and that's another thing I think for me, I never imagined that my career would turn into an endless string of like basically book reports. And yet that is more or less my life, is like taking these things and doing what I would have done in high school if I knew how to do it as well as I can today. But like trying to make an interesting, a thing that's really a lot of information, a lot of dense information, into something fun and interesting to watch. And that's sort of the goal.
And one bit of homework for the audience, if you're kind of at the beginning of your creative journey and you don't really know where to start, or you've got a lot of different irons on the fire and you're like, I don't know which direction to go in, and I get told to choose only one thing, do a mashup. Just put a bunch of things that you like into a literal hat or jar. You have that spaghetti jar in your kitchen somewhere. Write it on a piece of paper, put a whole bunch of them in there, shake it, and pick two and make the thing. Just I don't care if it's peanut butter Thundercats, you're going to make it and you are going to love it. Just do it.
I love both of those things. That sounds great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can I give you some money immediately?
I like one thing that I love.
So I'll say it's little personal thing for and it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's on the wall in our living room, but it's Afua gave my wife and I a drawing as a present for our wedding, which was we have a hedgehog whose name is T'Challa, and she made a mashup of Black Panther T'Challa and my hedgehog T'Challa, and it's in our living room, and it's beautiful. But Austin, I want to get your answer to this too. Like, how do you come up with themes? And I think in music, it's so much more abstract in a lot of ways. Like, it's actually something where like you can reach into a jar and pull out peanut butter and Thundercats and like do a visual thing. Like I can at least, and I think most people can probably see a visual pathway to getting those things together. But how would you take a concept like that and turn it into music? For example, like how would you even approach writing something like that?
Well, in the broadest sense, obviously the majority of the music that I write is written in a collaborative environment. So it's not me just sitting down to satisfy the muses, but I've been hired to add music to XYZ project. In the case of this game that just came out last week, the Pathless, that was started on that project 3.5 years ago. And so at the very beginning, we have conversations of it's all basically the short answer to your question is it's all in the conversations. Just immediately to what are we trying to say? What do we want the player to take away from this experience? In the specific case of this one, we hit upon really early this idea that the game has this kind of folkloric quality. I call it a playable myth, like where it feels like the story that you might associate with it's like the backstory of a constellation in the sky, where they say, now what is that character, what's their deal? And around a campfire someone tells you, oh well, that's the great warrior who went and did this and that, and there's these very kind of archetypal, sort of specific but mostly broad tales that get told. And the game felt like one of those. It felt like the experience of playing through something that would later be immortalized in that sort of way, because your character has a somewhat of a story but not really. There is a plot that is mostly abstract but has other concrete details. It just felt like it fell in that middle zone between pure metaphor and like Lord of the Rings, where there's a name of every species and genus of every leaf on the whole of Middle Earth. Like there's this middle ground of the kind of archetypal story. So then it was like, okay, well, I like the idea that the music has this folk quality, but the problem is folk instruments and folk musical idioms all specifically immediately point to the folk tradition they come from. So if you pick up a fiddle and start playing it in an Appalachian style, it's not like people are gonna, if they've had any familiarity with that music, it will immediately take them there. Or like penny whistles playing, an Irish jig. There are things that are deeply wedded to their tradition. So I started saying, I wonder if I can make a kind of global jam band that blends instruments from very intentionally disparate cultures that ends up feeling like, oh, this is very folk-like, but I can't really pin down where this is from. It doesn't feel arbitrary, though. It doesn't feel made up in a vacuum. It's not music that seems to just be sort of sprung from nowhere. It should feel like it is of some tradition, but one that's somehow alien. And that, I don't know how the hell to do that. That's why I needed 3.5 years.
But I think the conversation about what the story is something that I talk to my team about all the time, right? Like I talk to my guys constantly, and part of my mission as a creative director is to give as specific a vision as I can possibly give about what it is that we're trying to say. And I think that like the more specific I can be and the more I can understand what the point is and what we're trying to do, then when I hand it to our graphic designer, Tim, or my assistant producer, Pavel, who's behind the camera right now, then they can actually really understand what it is that we're going for. Then they have a lot of creative latitude to bring their best ideas to bear, right? And I think that those conversations are so important, and it's on both sides. It's being, as a vendor, as a creator, being able to listen to those things and really absorb them, and then take the 3 years, if you can get it, which you can't, but if you can take the time to actually really synthesize that and bring in all of the other pieces of your experience and research that you do and everything else to come up with something great based on that vision. But it's also, I think, really incumbent on the director, producer, writer, or whatever, to give their creative collaborators really, really good, very specific ideas on what they're looking for. And when I say specific, I do not, almost never do I tell people what to do. Like I almost never will tell anybody that I work with to use the color orange in this, or to, definitely it's got to be laid out in this way, or, if we're talking about set design or lighting or something like that, what I want to talk about is what I want the audience to feel and what I want the theme to be, and then let their imagination run wild, basically. Because what I really want more than anything is to create an environment where everybody who is involved has the ability to bring all of their ideas in, If it was only about my ideas,
focused innovation.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's really about, and it's something that you'll see some of the best companies in the world try to do this. If you look at how Pixar, especially in its heyday, operated, and I think still operates or tries to operate to a large extent. I mean, it's really heavily built on giving really clear vision and then allowing their artists to just kind of go nuts and figure out whatever it is, however they're going to solve the creative problems. You want everybody's ideas coming together. You don't just want one individual at the top. And going back to the iPencil point, right? Everybody has their unique talents and skills, and everybody can contribute to this if they're free to do it, right? Like if you create an environment where they're not totally inhibited or everything is super dictatorial, and you go like, well, you have to do this and you have to do that, and then I think you can, all of those things, like you can start synthesizing peanut butter and Thundercats and come up with something cool. That's going to stick, by the way.
That's with like hair.
I think it's also worth pointing out with your iPencil knowledge, like invoking that essay, is that it's more than just like I have a skill, you have a skill, you have a skill. It's that we see the world differently, and you cannot duplicate someone else's perspective within yourself. You can empathize, you're really close, but they're just going to see the problem different from you, and that's what I love. It's one of the things I really love in the movie Contact. You know, they've got the blind astronomer who's like, "Wait, I'm hearing harmonics in the sound that are like," because you know theoretically he just hears differently, and it's not it's like a little bit of a Hollywood moment, but the point is that he is he's not even asking the same questions that other people, because he's had a different life. And that, to me, that's the whole crux of all of this. You know, it's people coming together to make a thing benefit from just looking at the same. Like if I hold up my coffee cup, I'm looking at this side of it, but you're looking at this side that I cannot see without your help.
It's how genius happens, essentially, that you have a norm and that someone comes in with part of the discipline, a lot of the discipline, and then a different discipline, and they innovate. They bring what it is that they have to this, and all the boats rise, because now there's a new standard, whereas this is the way it was done before, or the only way you can do it. And then someone's like, yeah, I don't really know those rules. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to bring in this other thing that I know how to, because now I'm seeing this from this perspective, and it makes sense to me. It's kind of like with a book that I'm making, Aquarius, the Book of Myrrh. Like one thing that I grew up with was books that had music. Those things were never separated from me. So I had a book that was teaching me how to read, and it came with a record, and it had a television show, and all of these things were just locked into place. And so now I've made a full like Redo 360, and I'm like, I want my comic book to have, or my graphic novel to have videos that accompany it. I want to make music for it. I am making music for it. And part of the narrative, there's no dialogue at all, or the lyrics of the song is the narration for the book.
All right.
You know, so I want to experience things differently.
I love that. By the way, I'm very excited about this. I have another thing of Afua's. I have a bunch of her mermaid art, which predates the Book of Myrrh thing by a lot, and it's really, really good. And you guys should totally check that out if you haven't. But we have about 10 minutes left right now. Okay. I'd like to try something that we were not preparing for, but I'd like to try to do a speed round of going through going through, yes, a battle to the, no, there's no battle. I want to try to get through as many of the questions that are remaining as we can. And so I'm basically, whoever wants to take, you guys speak up to let me know whoever wants to take whichever question I throw out there, but just try to be a couple sentences, like as quickly as you can, like let's get this. So I'm going to start with, how do you know the difference between good, constructive criticism and just bad criticism?
For me, I'll just say I just always the best.
All right, I'm going to point to somebody next time. We've learned a lesson here. But Austin, take this one.
Well, I find that in rare instances is there such a thing as bad criticism. Sometimes it's poorly articulated, and sometimes it's in bad faith. But especially, most of the time, there is something to be gained from it. And it's on you to translate and figure out what it is that it's trying to teach you. So I don't really subscribe to the idea that there is much of bad criticism. It exists, but it's rare comparatively.
Sometimes I think you need to sleep on it too, because it might just make you mad that first time you hear it. Sleep on it, think about it the next day, and then implement what you got.
Nice. Question specifically for Afua. What is your procedure for getting better at drawing?
One, I carry a sketchbook with me everywhere. I do not leave my house unless I have a sketchbook with me, even if I'm going for a walk. Draw what you see so you can better create what you know. Because you're going to draw from your memory, and you have to refill those memory banks. if you're drawing from your imagination and you feel like, well, I don't really know hands, then you have to do an extensive study of hands. You've got to have a book that is dedicated to just drawing hands. Sorry that you can't just keep them in pockets forever. It's
like,
painful. It really is.
Sorry, I'm
It's
thinking
so
about
painful.
Rob Liefeld's feet drawing now. Sorry, Rob.
It's true. It's true. Lean in the direction of your fears. That is my answer. The things that you feel really like not so great at, spend an hour drawing those things and then breathe and then go back to your comfort zone.
Kevin, how do you keep a steady stream of motivation and creativity in your work?
Find something that you like to do to decompress. I think that's really important. Whether it's playing music or playing video games or going hiking, whatever. I think everybody needs some sort of thing that they do that they can fall back on that's not work related to refill the pitcher, so to speak.
Nice. This is an interesting one because it's actually specific to a career path that none of us have taken, but it says, would dancing professionally be an advisable plan regardless of low pay, high risk, and COVID?
If you
I think
can't not.
That's basically what I was. I think I'm going to take this one because I actually just had a conversation with a dear friend of mine who tragically runs a dance studio in Seattle, and they are dealing with huge issues right now. But I'm going to speak sort of on. Hopefully, I can. His name's Ian Howe. If you guys want to check out his dance studio, you can try to find him in Seattle. But hopefully, I can speak on behalf of Ian when I say, if you love what you're doing, there's never a bad time to start. I think I'll leave it there. Let me go to another question here. This is a really good question. How do you know the product you're creating is one that your customer base will love the most? And I would broaden this out maybe to say also your potential clients, right? How do you know that you're producing something that people actually want? And Afua, sure, if you want it.
Oh, you can just ask them. You really can. I mean, there's so many different platforms. I'm serious. Like the other day, I was like, hey, do you think I should make this print with or without the robot arm? And it's like, is that even a question? But at the same time, it was kind of like prompting pre-orders. Not really. It was a genuine question. It was just like, do you guys want this? Please want this robot arm? Yes, robot arm. Okay. And so those same people came back and got the thing with the robot arm. Ask people like to speak their mind. So give them an either or situation and say, hey, do you like this or this? And let them answer and get involved. Let them get involved in the creation, because that's also something that instills a sense of community with what it is you're creating too. Like I knew them when, like I had a part in this, and they did. The yellow one or the red one?
I'm going to send this to Austin, I think. Sorry, now I lost the track. Do you ever feel discouraged by all the ideas that are already out there? Does it ever feel difficult to create something that is big and new, but also original? Austin.
I honestly do not have an issue with that at all, because to me, really great ideas they stimulate thought. They make me excited to get back to work. They make me sort of dig deeper, or they pull me in a direction I might not have thought of. It's sort of mindlessly emulating someone else's work has never been appealing and never been fun. But if somebody releases a thing and I'm like, wow, what absolutely gorgeous production on that, or what a great melody that was, or how well engineered was that recording session, or whatever. There's always going to be something, and then it's going to make me think about how I can improve my own work just by now. It's not a conscious choice. I just think, that'd be interesting if what they did there with that saxophone. I wonder if that would apply to a cello or blah. And before I know it, I'm way past the thing that initially got my head going, and I'm gone down some new rabbit hole. So no, I think it's just a matter of recognizing that people are going to do amazing stuff, and there's going to be people that love it and hate it, and don't let that. It's not a competition in that sense. That. Don't worry about don't create a false zero-sum game. In other words, of like creative ideas. Someone thought of a good melody doesn't mean that they snatched it out of your hands.
So, all right.
Also, real quick, Sean, I would say in the grand scheme of things, not that many people are making things. Overall, it's a small group of people who make stuff. It's like the same 12 people making things, no matter like what genre you're talking about. So if you're like in the club of someone who makes something, you're already in like the top 0.0001%. So like, have a party.
It is, sorry, we don't have very much time, but I'm going to say this real quick. When I was a kid, my dad, it seemed like everywhere we ever went, my dad knew people. And I learned as an adult that the reason he knew that was because he knew everybody was because we went to places where he had professional connections. And I feel the same way now. I'm going to Nashville tomorrow, and I just had a call with somebody today that I did not know was going to Nashville. Turns out she is, and she'll be there. And the thing is, like, stuff like that happens to me all the time now because the world shrinks a whole lot once you kind of get up here. Right. But I'm going to leave this as the last question for everybody because it was in fact my last previously written question and the last one here, which is if you could tell yourself something to put you on your path when you were in high school, what would you say? Advice to your younger self. Kevin, you start.
My advice would just be that you can make a career out of being creative, or at least just start following your creativity as a hobby. I didn't even do that until kind of later in life. And that was really the most important thing, was just have your hobby be making stuff, and eventually, things might go well for you.
Austin.
My absolute would be embrace being divisive create something that takes a perspective, and maybe not everyone will love. And if you fall into this, like your survival instincts when you're first starting and you don't have a reputation, you don't have money in the bank, you don't have all those things that help bolster your confidence later, and let you take bigger swings, and feel less exposed doing so. It is nonetheless in your best interest to do that when all your kind of fight or flight instincts are telling you otherwise. Like, don't make a thing because you think, oh, people are going to love me for this. This is going to really be awesome because it's super similar to this other thing that I saw that people loved. Like, if you make a thing and you're going, boy, this is maybe going to be kind of controversial if it catches on, or like this. I don't even know if I like this, or like if you start feeling emotionally mixed about a thing, you're probably going down the right path. And don't let that screaming voice in your head that's begging you to play it safe overtake that, because that's what for years and years, if I listen back to the music that I wrote for the first 10 years or 15 years of me writing music, the one word that describes all of it is safe. And it's the thing I most aggressively push away from now.
Afua, final thoughts.
3 things. Number 1, the people you hang around are the people you will become. Number 2, don't take advice from unhappy people. Just don't. Just don't do it. And number 3, you are enough as you are. Now be great.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We are a tiny bit over time. Hopefully, you guys still were able to see the last little bit of this. Please check out every one of these panelists. They're amazing. Afua, Kevin, and Austin, thank you guys so much for joining us on this panel. I hope everybody had a great time. And check out Out of Frame with Fee and stuff on the screen. You guys can see all of that stuff, and check out fee.org. We've got 2 more days of Entrepreneur Week coming at you. So if you haven't registered for tomorrow or for the session on Thursday, you're still welcome to go do that. It's totally free. Just go to fee.org, check out the Entrepreneur Week landing page, and just sign up for the next ones. So hopefully you guys had a great time, and we will see you tomorrow.